The morning fog rolled thick over Pine Ridge, Washington, as Marcus Webb stood ankle-deep in mud, surveying what everyone in town called his foolish mistake. His work boots made sucking sounds with each step across the saturated ground where his cabin would rise. Behind him, the voices of his neighbors carried on the wind from their construction sites higher up the mountain, where granite bedrock promised stability and status. "You building a houseboat, Webb?" That's what Chuck Hartman had yelled down yesterday, his laughter echoing off the Douglas firs. Chuck's foundation was already poured on solid rock, his framing crew scheduled to start next week. Marcus wiped the sweat from his dark skin despite the cool November air. At 42, he had spent 20 years as a structural engineer in Seattle before cashing out his retirement to build here, in the mountain community where property was still affordable, where a black man with calloused hands and a quiet demeanor could disappear into the work he loved. The mud squelched beneath his boots as he walked the perimeter again, measuring, calculating, seeing what others refused to see. This land had been the last available lot in the Pine Ridge development, dismissed by every other buyer who came through. Too wet, the realtor had warned. Seasonal springs, unstable soil, nightmare for foundations. She had actually tried to talk him out of the purchase. But Marcus saw something different. He saw the way water moved through this land, the ancient patterns of drainage, the clay composition that would work with him instead of against him if he understood its language. While others fought against nature, he would build with it. From up the slope, he could see the other 5 cabins taking shape. Chuck Hartman's massive 3-story lodge dominated the highest point, perched on an outcropping of granite that had probably been there since the last ice age. Next to it, the Reynolds family was building their retirement dream home, also on bedrock. Below them, 3 more families had claimed the solid ground, their foundations already cured, their walls rising toward the gray sky. And then there was Marcus, down in the hollow where water collected, where mud ruled, where sensible people knew better than to build. His phone buzzed. A text from his daughter, Jasmine, back in Seattle. "Dad, Mom says you're building in a swamp. Please tell me that's her being dramatic." Marcus smiled despite himself. His ex-wife Linda had many talents, but understanding soil mechanics wasn't one of them. He texted back, "Not a swamp, just misunderstood land. Like your old man." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. No response came. The sound of a truck engine made him look up. Chuck Hartman's Platinum F350 rumbled down the dirt access road, splashing through puddles without slowing. The truck stopped at the edge of Marcus's property, and Chuck stepped out, all 6'3" of him, wearing a Patagonia jacket that probably cost more than Marcus's entire tool budget. "Morning, Marcus." Chuck's voice carried that particular tone of concern that barely masked contempt. "Listen, I've been thinking. The Homeowners Association, we're all getting together tonight to discuss the development standards. Making sure everyone's builds are up to code, maintaining property values, that sort of thing." Marcus straightened, meeting Chuck's eyes. "My permits are all filed. Inspector signed off on my engineering plans." Sure. Chuck waved a hand dismissively. "It's just, we're all wondering if maybe you might want to reconsider this location. I've got a buddy in real estate, could probably help you flip this lot, find something more suitable up on the ridge, before you sink too much money into actual sinking." Behind Chuck, Marcus could see 2 other neighbors watching from their properties. Bill Reynolds had his arms crossed. Sarah Chun was talking on her phone but kept glancing down toward them. "I appreciate the concern," Marcus said evenly, "but I know what I'm doing." "Do you, though?" Chuck stepped closer, lowering his voice like they were sharing a secret. "Because between you and me, the guys are worried. Your foundation fails, it affects all our property values. And that mud pit you're standing in, it's not exactly inspiring confidence." "No offense." "None taken," Marcus replied, though his jaw tightened. He had heard this tone before in corporate boardrooms in Seattle, from men who assumed his hands-on approach meant he didn't understand the theory, who thought his quiet nature meant he could be pushed. Chuck nodded slowly, as if he had expected this response and found it disappointing. "Well, we tried. Just don't say we didn't warn you when the spring thaw comes and your whole foundation slides down into the valley." He climbed back into his truck, then paused with the door open. "Oh, and Marcus, You might want to hire a real engineer, someone with credentials. The truck roared away, leaving Marcus standing in his mud, surrounded by the judgment of solid rock. 3 weeks later, the ridicule crystallized into something harder. Marcus arrived at his site just after dawn to find a handwritten sign stuck in his mud. Future location of Pine Ridge swimming pool. Below it, someone had drawn a crude stick figure drowning. He pulled the sign out, mud dripping from the wooden stake, and tossed it in his truck bed. This was the third one this week. The first had red quicksand ahead. The second, abandon all hope. But signs were just paper and spite. What came next cut deeper. The Homeowners Association meeting happened on a Tuesday night in Chuck's partially finished great room. Marcus walked in to find 11 faces turning toward him, conversations stopping mid-sentence. Folding chairs formed a semicircle around a portable heater. Everyone had coffee except him. Marcus, glad you could make it. Chuck stood at the front like a prosecutor preparing his case. We were just discussing foundation inspections, making sure everyone's following proper procedure. Mine passed inspection, Marcus said, taking a seat near the back. Right, but we're talking about additional inspections. Chuck pulled out a folder. The association has decided to hire an independent structural engineer to evaluate all builds. For safety, for property values. Bill Reynolds cleared his throat. He was a retired banker, soft around the middle, hard in the eyes. We're all paying for this review except you, Marcus. Your property gets a free inspection. Can't say we're not looking out for you. I don't need another inspection, Marcus said quietly. My engineering is sound. Sarah Chin leaned forward. Her husband David nodded beside her. With all due respect, Marcus, you're building in conditions none of us would touch. We have children who'll be playing in this development. We need assurance that your structure won't become a liability. My daughter visits me too, Marcus replied. You think I'd build something unsafe for my own child? Then you won't mind the inspection. Chuck's smile didn't reach his eyes. Unless there's something you're worried we'll find? The room went silent except for the heater's electric hum. Marcus felt the weight of their stares, the presumption in their questions. He had felt this before, the assumption of incompetence, the demand that he prove what others took for granted. When is this inspection? Marcus asked. Next week. Chuck handed him a paper. The engineer's name is Robert Dalton, Stanford graduate, 30 years experience. He'll give us a professional opinion on whether your foundation design meets our community standards. Your permits already cleared me, Marcus said. Association standards are different than county minimums. Bill Reynolds smiled like he was doing Marcus a favor. We're just protecting everyone's investment here. Surely you understand. Marcus took the paper and stood. I'll be there for the inspection. As he walked out, he heard Chuck's voice resume behind him, confident and clear. Now, about the spring social, they had made him the problem. Not the difficult land, not the challenge of building in mountains, but him. Robert Dalton arrived in a Mercedes that looked out of place on the muddy access road. He was 60-something, silver-haired, carrying a leather portfolio that probably cost more than Marcus's entire surveying equipment. Chuck, Bill, and Sarah flanked him like an entourage as they approached Marcus's site. The foundation was complete now, a complex system of floating piers and grade beams that Marcus had designed specifically for expansive clay soil. It looked different from the traditional foundations up on the ridge, unconventional, and that was exactly what had them worried. Mr. Webb. Dalton's handshake was firm but brief. I've reviewed your plans. Interesting approach. Thank you, Marcus said, knowing interesting could mean anything. Dalton walked the perimeter slowly, making notes, taking photos, occasionally kneeling to examine connection points. The others hung back, whispering among themselves. Marcus caught fragments. Liability insurance, property values, precedent. After 20 minutes, Dalton stopped at the northwest corner, where Marcus had installed a series of deep friction piers, extending 30 feet into stable soil below the clay layer. He studied them for a long time, then turned to Chuck. Can I see the foundation on your property? Chuck blinked. My foundation? It's standard pier and beam on bedrock. Nothing complicated. Show me anyway. They made the walk up the slope, Marcus trailing behind. Chuck's foundation sat exactly as advertised. Massive concrete piers drilled directly into granite. Traditional. Expensive. Exactly what everyone assumed was the right way to build. Dalton spent less than 5 minutes examining it before walking back down to Marcus's site. He pulled out a tablet and began running calculations, his fingers moving across the screen. The silence stretched out, broken only by birdsong and the distant sound of hammering from another property. Finally, Dalton looked up at Chuck. "When was your geological survey done?" "Last summer." Chuck's confidence had developed a crack. "August, I think. And you didn't test for seismic activity patterns or seasonal groundwater fluctuation in the bedrock?" "It's bedrock," Chuck said slowly. "It doesn't fluctuate." Dalton turned to Marcus. "Your foundation accounts for soil expansion, seasonal water movement, and seismic flexibility." His voice carried across the site. "You've essentially designed a floating foundation that moves with the earth instead of fighting against it." Marcus felt his heart rate slow for the first time in weeks. If you're standing with Marcus right now, hoping he's about to prove everyone wrong, do me a favor and subscribe to this channel. Because what happens next is going to change everything in Pine Ridge. Dalton closed his portfolio and looked directly at Chuck. "Mr. Hartman, I need to be frank with you. Your foundation concerns me far more than Mr. Webb's. That granite you're so proud of is fractured. I can see the stress lines from here." The color drained from Chuck's face. "That's impossible. We had it surveyed." "By whom?" Dalton was already walking back up the slope, Marcus and the others following. "A general contractor or an actual geological engineer?" Chuck didn't answer. At Chuck's foundation, Dalton knelt beside one of the massive concrete piers. He pulled out a small hammer and tapped the exposed granite. The sound was wrong, hollow in places where solid rock should ring clear. He moved to another section, then another. Each tap revealed the same story. This entire outcropping is fractured granite. Dalton stood, brushing dust from his hands. Probably from ancient seismic activity. It looks solid on the surface, but underground these fissures run deep. Add the weight of your structure, seasonal freeze-thaw cycles, and eventually these cracks will expand. Eventually? Sarah Chen's voice was tight. How eventually? Could be 5 years. Could be 50. But when it goes, it won't be gradual. Dalton looked at each of them in turn. Fractured bedrock fails catastrophically. Your entire foundation could shift 6 inches in a single event. Bill Reynolds had gone pale. "What about our properties?" "I'll need to inspect each one individually, but if you're all building on the same granite formation, you're all potentially at risk." The silence that followed was broken only by wind moving through the pines. Marcus stood apart from the group, watching their certainty crumble like the rock beneath their feet. Chuck found his voice first, though it had lost its swagger. "And Marcus's foundation?" Dalton turned back toward the hollow where Marcus had built. "Mr. Webb's foundation is designed for ground movement. The friction piers extend below the unstable clay into virgin soil. The grade beams allow for seasonal expansion and contraction. In a seismic event, his structure will flex and settle rather than crack." He looked at Marcus with something approaching respect. "It's actually a textbook example of engineering for difficult soils." "Where did you study?" "University of Washington," Marcus said quietly. "Then 20 years with Bergman Structural in Seattle. Specialized in seismic retrofitting." The irony settled over them like the morning fog. They had questioned his credentials, mocked his muddy site, tried to force him out, all while sitting on foundations that could fail at any moment. Chuck's voice came out smaller than Marcus had ever heard it. "Can it be fixed?" "Possibly." Dalton made notes on his tablet. "You'll need soil anchors, reinforcement, probably helical piers to bypass the fractured rock entirely. Expensive work. Each property is looking at $60,000 to $80,000 in remediation minimum." Bill Reynolds sat down heavily on a stack of lumber. "We already spent our full budget on the foundations we have." Marcus looked at the men and women who had judged him, who had assumed his quiet competence was incompetence, who had made him prove himself twice while they built carelessly on assumptions and arrogance. That evening, Marcus sat on a folding chair beside his foundation, watching the sun drop behind the ridge. His phone buzzed with messages he wasn't ready to answer. News had spread through Pine Ridge faster than wildfire. 3 more homeowners had called Dalton for emergency inspections. The association group chat, which Marcus had muted weeks ago, showed 73 unread messages. Footsteps in the mud made him turn. Chuck Hartman approached alone, without his truck, without his swagger, hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets. "Mind if I sit?" Marcus gestured to a bucket turned upside down. Chuck lowered himself onto it, looking older somehow, tired in a way money couldn't fix. "I owe you an apology." Chuck's voice was stripped of its usual certainty. "Actually, I owe you about a dozen apologies. The signs, the association vote, questioning your credentials. All of it." Marcus said nothing, just waited. "I saw mud and assumed incompetence." Chuck laughed bitterly. "Turns out I was standing on a cracked foundation assuming it was solid." "That's some metaphor, isn't it?" "What are you going to do?" Marcus asked. "Dalton's coming back tomorrow with ground-penetrating radar. Full survey of the entire ridge." Chuck rubbed his face. "If it's as bad as he thinks, we're all looking at massive retrofits. Some people might have to abandon their builds entirely if the rock is too compromised." Marcus watched the last light fade from the sky. Part of him wanted to feel vindicated, to let them struggle the way they tried to make him struggle. But another part, the part that had spent 20 years solving impossible structural problems, couldn't turn away from a challenge. "I could look at it," Marcus said quietly. "The foundation issues. If you want." Chuck's head snapped up. "After how we treated you." "I'm not doing it for you." Marcus met his eyes. "I'm doing it because I don't like seeing people build on broken ground. And because maybe you'll think twice before assuming the worst about the next person who does things differently." Chuck nodded slowly, something like shame crossing his features. "Dalton mentioned you specialized in seismic retrofitting. Said you were one of the best he'd seen. Used to be my whole job. Saving buildings everyone else said were doomed." Marcus stood, stretching. "Turns out I'm pretty good at working with broken things." Over the next week, Marcus surveyed each property with Dalton. The news was mixed. 2 foundations could be saved with extensive reinforcement. 3 needed complete redesigns. Chuck's required the most work, hundreds of micropiles to bypass the fractured granite entirely. But it could be done. Marcus drew up the plans, calculated loads, designed solutions that worked with the mountain instead of against it. And slowly, grudgingly, then genuinely, the community that had mocked him began to listen. Sarah Chen brought him coffee one morning. Bill Reynolds asked about hiring him as a consultant. Even Chuck started showing up to learn, taking notes, asking questions without the arrogance. 18 months later, Marcus stood in that same hollow, but everything had changed. His cabin rose 3 stories above the mud that no longer seemed like mud at all. Cedar siding weathered to silver gray, floor-to-ceiling windows catching the morning light. A wraparound porch where his daughter Jasmine sat with her laptop, working remotely for a week. At 26, she had finally understood why her father chose this place, this challenge, this life. "Dad," she called out. "Mrs. Chun is here." Sarah Chun walked up the stone path Marcus had laid, careful stepping stones that accommodated the seasonal ground movement. She carried a folder and wore the expression of someone about to ask a favor. "Marcus, I have a problem." She sat on the porch steps. "My sister in Oregon is building near a floodplain. Her contractor says the land is impossible, wants to charge double. I told her I know someone who specializes in impossible." Marcus smiled. "Send me the survey data. I'll take a look." Above them, on the ridge, all 6 properties now stood complete. Chuck's lodge had taken an extra year and cost him $80,000 in foundation repairs, but it stood solid, anchored deep beneath the fractured granite. Bill and Sarah's homes had required similar work. 2 families had sold their lots and left, unable to afford the corrections, but new owners had come in, and Marcus had consulted on both builds. The Pine Ridge Homeowners Association had elected Marcus as their structural advisor. He attended meetings now not as the outsider being questioned, but as the expert whose opinion everyone sought. The irony wasn't lost on him. Chuck's truck rumbled down the access road, but this time it stopped at Marcus's door. Chuck stepped out carrying 2 coffees from the good place in town, the expensive roastery he used to brag about. "Morning, Marcus. Thought you might need this." He handed over a cup. "I'm having some settling in the northwest corner. Could you come take a look? This afternoon work?" "Perfect." Chuck glanced up at the cabin. "You know, I drive past here every day and still can't believe we almost ran you off. Best builder in Pine Ridge, and we treated you like you didn't know a level from a plumb line." "People see what they expect to see," Marcus said. "Until the ground shifts." His phone buzzed. A text from Dalton. "Got a project in Colorado. Unstable slope, impossible site. Client specifically asked for you. Interested?" Marcus looked out over Pine Ridge, at the community that had doubted him and then learned from him, at the cabin that proved mud could be stronger than stone if you understood its language. He typed back, "Send details." If the story moved you, if you stayed until the end to see Marcus prove them all wrong, I want to say thank you. Hit that like button, drop a comment telling me what you thought, and subscribe because I've got more stories about people who succeeded exactly where everyone said they'd fail. What story should I tell next? Let me know below. Until then, remember, sometimes the strongest foundations are built on the ground everyone else refuses to touch.